but in terms of why we're here today, on October 6th, the evening of October 6th, I could not sleep. I had a terrible anxiety, the source of which I did not know. And I tossed and I turned in a sense of foreboding and just was greatly bothered. It felt like spiritual warfare. And I finally took myself out of bed so as not to bother my wife and went down on the couch and was able to grab a couple of hours of shut-eye on the couch. Disturbed shut-eye, but still a little sleep. And I woke up at 6:30 on October 7th and opened my phone and, of course, went to news like so many of us do, and I immediately noticed that Israel was at war. And I've been there twice, and maybe many of you have been there as well. And so it felt deeply personal. And one of the reasons that it felt deeply personal was because my friend Uri lives in the Jerusalem mountains, and he was my first tour guide in 2014 when I went there, one of the last times Israel was at war in Gaza on the ground. This was different. And with the kibbutz that were attacked and the massacres that occurred there, we have a friend that lives in one of those kibbutzes. So I called Uri, probably the first time we spoke on the phone in almost a decade. And thankfully she was still alive. And most of her family was still alive. But her friends and some members of the family were slaughtered in the most unimaginable ways. And so I was almost in tears, and so was Uri, and I asked him, what are you going to do? Because as an educator, as a historian, as someone who has served in the IDF for 22 years as a paratrooper and been to war against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon himself, he now makes his living as a guide. So when this church goes to Israel, or your family, or whomever goes to Israel, he can take you and show you all the wonderful biblical sites that you've been reading about, and that's how I met him. And so what are you going to do now? Because now the tours are all canceled through at least February. And he said, well, I think I might try to go on a speaking tour. And I immediately said, let's do that. And this is one of those moments of spontaneous order where things just miraculously seem to come together. And I began to call everyone I know all over the country and be connected to other people, mostly Christians, who saw the wisdom and the value of right now we can't go to Israel, but we could bring Israel here through Uri's offices. And we could bring the cause of Israel here today. And so we can talk about all the wonderful biblical lands and the biblical history and the archaeology and all that happened there and where Jesus Christ himself walked. But we can also talk about them and those that weren't so lucky. And the war and how it has not just changed Israel, but how, and we don't know it yet, it's changed the United States and Western civilization, and that their war is our war. And so there's really no one better with his master's degree in international relations and his knowledge in terms of the depth, both in terms of the ancient history and the archaeological, but the modern and the geopolitical, and quite frankly, the warfare aspect of it as well, to speak to all aspects. And so a group of us started just raising money from churches like this, and thank you very much, raising money from churches like Abundant Life, the Herzog Foundation, and so many others, to be able to bring him over here, but also to be able to provide for him too, so he can feed his 3 kids. Because they're in Jerusalem right now, as rockets are being launched at his children, and so many other children like his, while he's here with us. So Uri, thank you very much for being here. I give you my good friend Uri Goldflam, and appreciate you very much for coming to join us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to come here today and listen to the story that I want to share with you. I'm glad I'm here. I'm thankful to have friends like Ryan and many others who arranged for me to come here. I'm not happy to be here. I wish I didn't have to. I would have loved to host you in Israel and travel with you through the Holy Land and tell you the story of Israel, on the ground while reading Bible and pointing to the places where things have happened. That's my passion. That's my true passion. And I hope one day to be able to share that with you. But until then, I found it very, very important to be able to take my story, the story of Israel, and bring it here to you. I know you've been hearing a lot of the news, and there's a lot of information coming your way, a lot of talking heads, and sometimes you need a little bit of clarity. So what I'd like to do is try to provide you with a bit of a framework. First of all, to understand the geography. Where is Israel? Where is Gaza? What's the difference between Gaza and the West Bank? Why is it even there? Who's Hamas? What's the difference between Hamas and the Palestinians? Why are they fighting a war? Why is Israel fighting a war? So all these questions, these are basic questions that they don't really ask on TV. I'd like to address them. I also want to kind of make the point or give you the tools to understand better much of the information and give you the tools to talk about this issue with others. It seems like a lot of people have really strong opinions about this issue. And I know that I'm among friends. I know that I'm among people who intuitively understand the good and the bad in this situation and stand with Israel. But sometimes you need a little bit more clarity, a little bit more answers to some of the tough questions that are being asked, and I'd like to help you with that as well. And so I'll give you lenses through which to look at this conflict, from the personal, local, regional, global, and even civilizational. I call it 3+1. Finally, we'll try to understand why this was such a watershed moment. What happened on October 7th that made this an event I called a paradigm-shifting event? Events that were so terrible that shook the very, very ground and the foundation of our belief systems, our paradigms, our presuppositions, all our assumptions from October 6th are now no longer relevant. And we have to come up with new paradigms, with new frameworks to try to understand our path looking forward. So let's just jump right into it. The Middle East. It's kind of a misnomer because it's not in the middle and it's not in the east. This whole area, it only makes sense if you're from England. It's halfway. It's on the way between England and India. So it's in the middle. It's in the middle way to the east. So that's the name. But essentially what we're looking at is this area, all these countries that were created on the dead carcass of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Turkish Empire has been around there. This is Turkey over here. It's been around there for more than 400 years. And they've been encompassing. That's the Muslim empire that took up that whole space. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire falls apart, shrinks into the borders of Turkey today, and the rest of the territory is carved up between the European empires, especially France and England. France gets pretty much all of this, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Syria and Lebanon, or the countries that will become, right? They haven't been created yet. They will become Syria and Lebanon. And England gets Egypt, this area over here, Palestine, that's the name the Romans gave it, Jordan, and Iraq. That is how the land is divided. When you see straight lines on a map, you can assume you know where they were drawn. They were drawn on a map in an office in London. Okay? So that's what we're looking at over here. And in it is, Israel is this tiny little sliver of land among all this other space over here. How big it is? That's how big it is. Good. The wow is exactly the right response. Israel's tiny. Right? Israel's the size of New Jersey. Israel is a fifth size of Missouri. Okay, it's really, really small. Less than 10 million people. The length of it from here to here is about a 7-hour drive. That's it. And from here to here, it's at its widest point, it's maybe 70 miles. At its narrowest, it's 9 miles. And this area is a mountain area. Okay, that's the area we call the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. Israel can easily be cut in half, and then, well, you can imagine the rest. So we're really looking at a very, very small country, and the size of it also has very, very large strategic implications. How did it get this small, or how did it get this big? For that, we have to go out and talk about the emergence of the Middle East after World War I. All these countries were created by the French or the British after World War I and led to a level of independence, essentially taking groups of, or tribes of Arabs and Muslims and Christians and Kurds and Sunnis and Shias and crafting out of those modern nation states. Okay, it's called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It's from 1917, and that is how the modern Middle East is created. After Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the British took Palestine, which was this region over here. And again, I remind you, Palestine is the name. The Romans gave the region back in the 2nd century. They changed the name from Provincia Judea, from Judea, to Provincia Palestina, in an attempt to disassociate the Jews from Judea. This is Emperor Adrian, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, 70 years after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The British made promises to the Jews and promises to the Arabs. During the war, World War I, they needed as many allies as possible. Do you remember Lawrence of Arabia? Peter O'Toole, Omar Sharif. Tomorrow we take Aqaba, right? Remember that? So they need the support of the Arabs from Arabia with the war against the Turks. And so when they enlist the Hashemite family, the biggest tribe in Mecca, and they say, you help us defeat the Ottomans and we will give you a kingdom. Where? In Palestine. Right there. At the same time, they're making a deal with the Jews. There's a guy called Chaim Weizmann. He's in England. He tells the British, if you support the Zionist cause, then the Jews of the world will help you in your war effort. And so the Balfour Declaration is made in 1917. Lord Balfour claims or declares His Majesty's government sees favorably the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Okay, again, without taking away of the rights of other minorities and other groups, they make the same promise to the Jews and the Arabs. And then they spend the next 30 years trying to undo the mess that they've caused. In 1922, they made good on their promise to the Arabs, and they create the country of Transjordan. This is that over here. They take Palestine, they rip it in half, and they create the country of Transjordan. And what's left of the British Mandate of Palestine is just this area over here. And so Jordan is now Kingdom of Transjordan is now a thing. And now we move forward. So here we go. You can see over here these 3 sections. The partition plan. The British had enough. They decided in 1947 to leave. They don't want to do this anymore. They don't want to deal with the Jews. They don't want to deal with the Arabs. They're sick and tired of it. So I'm making a very long story short. This is by no means a comprehensive history lesson of the Middle East. Okay? But the British have had enough. They leave. They decide to leave in 1947. They announce that we're leaving May 15th, 1948. The UN steps in. Not the League of Nations, now it's the UN. The UN travel the land. They create a map. They put lines around the centers of population of the Jews and the Arabs, and they create 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Jews are supposed to get here the blue areas, the Arabs are getting the brown areas. The Jews accept, the Arabs reject, and begin a war. First, it's a civil war. The British are still there. It's a civil war between the Jews and the Arabs of Palestine. Nobody, by the way, call them Israelis and Palestinians yet. There's no Israel, there's no Palestine, there's just a British mandate. The result of the war is that the Arabs lose. The Arabs lose the southern area over here to Egypt. The area that's the Gaza Strip was supposed to be the Gaza area shrinks. Now, this is a border between Egypt and British mandate Palestine. And you can imagine, people don't just end at the border, right? This is an imaginary line. So there are people on both sides of this line. Who are they? They're the same people, right? They're Egyptian Arabs that have moved up from here. Many fled in 1948 back towards Egypt, but now they're coming back not as Egyptian expats, but as Palestinian refugees. At any rate, this area shrinks under Egyptian control and remains part of Egypt for the next 19 years until 1967. Same thing in this area over here. The mountain area over here shrinks. The Jordanian, remember Transjordan? Transjordan crosses the river Jordan, invades the newborn state of Israel with the intention of destroying or not making this birth a quiet birth. And so the state of Israel will never get off the ground. They fail, and instead of creating a new Arab state in this area, they annex the Judean Samaria area to the country of Transjordan and rename it. Now call it the West Bank. Now the Transjordan is the country Jordan with an East Bank and a West Bank. That's where the name comes from. Okay, the name West Bank because it's the west bank of the river Jordan. All right? Now, we call it Judean Samaria. That is, have you heard of those three guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? You heard of them? That's where they lived. The kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, that's where they were. So there's more Jewish history in that piece of land than all of Haifa and Tel Aviv combined. However, in 1967, when Israel captures this land, another war, a preemptive strike, an attempt to destroy Israel by the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Syrians, Israel in a preemptive strike is able to vanquish the Arab armies in 6 days, triples in size. All the Sinai Peninsula, all the Gaza Strip, all the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. For the first time, Israel has room to breathe. There is a sense of self-confidence. There is a sense that there is military strength, which we didn't think we had until then. I would say that confidence also came with a level of arrogance. That arrogance that led us 6 years later to the terrible war of 1973, the Yom Kippur War. In 1973, October 73, is when Israel is attacked by Egypt and Syria. It's a terrible, terrible losses, but over a period of 3 weeks, we're able to defeat the Syrian and the Egyptian army and take the war to the other side. By the end of that war, Israel is already stationed over here by the Suez Canal. 6 years later, after negotiations with Egypt, we redeploy on the international border, and all of Sinai goes back to Egypt. Now, the post-67 war the post-67 period is very, very important, because in 1967, Israel for the first time became, this is the word that entered our lexicon in 67 and everybody's familiar with, Israel became an occupier, an occupying force. Until 67, Israel was in the border of 1948. This was occupied by Egypt. This was occupied by Jordan. And nobody gave two hoots about that. Okay? It was Egypt, it was Jordan. They didn't try to make it into Palestine. It wasn't a thing. Only when Israel took over that territory in 67, the term occupation is now being born, and the occupation, and the resistance of local population, because the land's not empty. The land's never empty. There were people there. There were people who didn't want Israel's presence. And the clash and the friction between the local population and the Israeli occupation is what led everybody to the assumption and the presupposition and the paradigm that is the occupation, which is the source of the conflict. Roll back the occupation, solve the conflict, right? Which is why when Israel enhances and entrenches its hold on the territory, then the conflict increases. Israel withdraws from the territory. In theory, it's supposed to be helpful to end the conflict. That's the formula. Israel gives up land, Arabs give peace, and we live happily ever after. Right? Unicorns and rainbows. That's the formula that we've been working, that's the working assumption, that's been the formula for more than 50 years. It was true already in 67, a week after. Israel offered the territory, the Arabs rejected. They went to Khartoum, and they made the famous 3 no's. No to negotiation, no to recognition, no to peace with Israel. The offer goes to the drawers. It's that assumption that gave us the peace with Egypt. We gave up the Sinai, we got peace. Right? It strengthens our assumption. And it's that assumption which led us to the Oslo Accords. 1993, Israel has a mutual recognition agreement with the PLO, Yasser Arafat, with the understanding that the Palestinians will now gain control and authority and responsibility over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, over their entire population, have the ability to build state institutions, control their own borders, and over a period of 5 years, there will be enough trust between the sides that we'll be able to go and talk about the big issues and reach an agreement. A 2-state solution. Palestine, Israel, living side by side in peace. It didn't go off so well. Almost right away, we have resistance from Hamas. It was already an existing and functioning organization. This is the time that the bus bombs, the suicide bombers who get on public buses and blow themselves up, and restaurants, and that comes into our lives. And the resistance and the backlash was so hard that even a Jewish extremist murders our prime minister. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist in 1995. This all brings the prime minister in the year 2000, Ehud Barak, together with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat, to get together in Camp David and hammer out a final deal. Ehud Barak puts all the cards on the table. Land for peace? Great. I'm going to give you all the land. In exchange for all the land, what do I want? All the peace. That's the deal, right? Whatever I can put on the table, that's it. I'm giving it all up. I want the entire thing, all the peace, meaning that Yasser Arafat has signed the dotted line that says it's the end of the conflict. No more conflict. The end of hostilities. He got up and walked away from the table. Wasn't able to make that promise. He had all sorts of reasons. I only represent Palestinians. I don't represent all the Arabs. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he walked away from an offer that gave him 99% of his demands. Instead, Oslo fell apart. What went wrong are all those bus bombs and restaurants. 5 years. It was 5 years of intensive suicide bombings and terrorism and buildings and restaurants and buses and drive-by shootings and car rammings and stabbings. It was a bloodbath. And I wish I could tell you that's the worst thing I'm going to be talking about today. But 2.5 years into it, Israel realized it had to do something drastic. In 1995, when Arafat came to town, Israel pulled out its forces from the Palestinian cities. These are all the big cities. The majority of the Palestinian population is urban. So it's Hebron and Bethlehem and Ramallah and Jenin and Nablus, that's Shechem, and Kilkilia and Tulkarem and Jericho. These are all the big Palestinian cities. 95% of the Palestinian population live in these cities and in their immediate environs. That was under Palestinian control, and in 2002, Israel decided to go back into those areas to face the terrorists in hand-to-hand combat, face-to-face combat, house to house, street to street, alley to alley, with tremendous losses to Israel, but it was the only way to root out these terror organizations that were carrying out the suicide bombs in Israel. The second thing Israel did was build a barrier, a fence. In some cases, it's a wall around the Palestinian territories, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, to prevent would-be suicide bombers to physically cross the border and go and blow themselves up. And these two things together happened around here, and you could see almost immediately the divergence in the graph. The successful suicide attacks went almost down to zero wherever a fence was built. Okay? And the Intifada, the name is the Intifada. When you hear shouts in the street, export the Intifada, globalize the Intifada, I want you to remember the pictures of the bus bombs. That's what they mean. But in 2005, even though the Intifada was over, we still realized that we need to do something with Gaza. Not a single suicide bomber came out of Gaza because Gaza already had a fence around it. There was also Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip. There were Israeli troops. There were Israeli citizens. Jewish towns that are called settlements in the Gaza Strip. And in 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon at the time decided it's not sustainable any longer. There were 2 troops for every citizen. It was just not sustainable. Back then, there was more than 1.5 million Palestinians, hostile Palestinians living in Gaza, and only 10,000 Israelis. That doesn't work. And so we decided to redeploy along the international border and uproot 10,000 Jews from their homes. We weren't able to do a land for peace in a negotiated manner. Ariel Sharon decided to unilaterally withdraw from the territory to give the Palestinians the opportunity to build statehood. So we pulled out the settlers from here and here, the living and the dead, by the way, also pulled out the cemeteries, because you know what radical Muslims do to cemeteries of other faiths, deployed on the international border. This is not disputed territory. I remind you, this is from 1948, not disputed territory, not occupied. The kibbutz communities, the communal farms, and the towns there are not settlements. Okay? And Israel redeployed along the border. All the Palestinians had to do was flip the switch in the factories and in the industrial and agricultural infrastructure that Israel left behind, intact. Within a week, they could have been exporting cherry tomatoes, strawberries, and tulips to Holland. They had the know-how, the capability, the talent. They could have done it easily. Instead, within 4 days, they destroyed all the greenhouses. They took out the water pipes from the ground to build rockets. Arafat died in 2005. We disengaged in 2004. We disengaged in 2005. In 2006, Palestinians have elections. In those elections, Hamas wins 75% of the vote. That's not me saying, that's Jimmy Carter saying. He was there, he oversaw the elections. He wrote that he too was surprised that Hamas won such a majority because Hamas is a rejectionist organization. His words, a terror organization that rejects the two-state solution, that rejects any negotiation with Israel, yet they won 75%. He couldn't explain that, but that's what he saw and reported. And in 2007, a year after that, Hamas stages a violent coup that takes over the Gaza Strip. When I say a violent coup and overthrowing the PLO, that's literally throwing them from the rooftops. Like they went up on the rooftops with the PLO, with the Fatah, with the Palestinian Authority clerks, and whoosh, threw them off the tallest building in Gaza. They shot them in the streets and took over the Gaza Strip in a very violent coup. At first, like they looked like a band of hoodlums with guns, but within a year, they already look like this. Hamas is now fully in control of the Gaza Strip. A word about Hamas. Who is Hamas? These are just a few excerpts, but I urge you, when you have time, when you go home, to look up the Hamas Charter and read it at full. You can find it Yale University Avalon Project. They have translations of many historical documents. Hamas Charter is one of them. And you'll read there, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until it is obliterated by Islam as the ones that came before it. They consider Israelis, Jews, to be crusaders, usurpers, invaders. All right? And the only path is battle and extinction of the state of Israel. The Prophet, prayer and peace be upon him, said, the time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, which will cry, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come on and kill me." Liberation can only come through death. Liberation can only come through killing of the infidel. It's not simply a matter of conquest and occupation and colonization. This is how the Arabs colonized the entire Middle East. It's also a question of jihad. And I want to spend just a minute to understand this concept because we lack the language to understand what is jihad really. All of us, since 9/11, the word jihad came into our lives. Holy war. But in the West, the concept is so strange and so foreign, we either don't bother reading into it, or we explain it away as, oh, they don't really mean it. It's only because their lives are so miserable. If only they had a little bit a better economy, lift the sanctions, give them more opportunity. Decolonize, because it's the colonialism that caused it to begin with. Jihad is the belief that the ultimate goal of life is death, not as a consequence, but as a design. Because life, our existence here on earth, is very short and tiny and inconsequential compared to the real life, which is the afterlife, after death. And to get there is to get to that stage, the afterlife, as quickly as possible, is your desire. And the best way to get there is through martyrdom. Right? The martyr is the one that gets to heaven fastest. He gets to heaven with a red carpet. He gets to heaven with lots of gifts waiting for him at the end of the road. And if it can come with the blood of the innocents and the blood of the infidel on his hands, that's even better. To get to heaven after killing the infidels will cleanse you of your sins, and you'll be able to go through the main door. So the sinless, the innocent, get to be united with the divine the most easily. Who are the most innocent? The children. I want you to understand this for a second, because I don't want to sound crass, but this is what we need to understand. For the jihadi Muslim, for these radical Islamic jihadists, death of children is not a bad thing. The death of children is actually a good thing. Because when children die, they go straight to heaven. They go straight to the bosom of the Prophet and Allah. That's something to be rejoicing about. That's a concept that's very hard for us to grasp. And if they can kill the infidels on the way, even better. When a jihadist goes into a mosque in Pakistan and blows himself up, killing 153 people, including 70 children, in a mosque. He's not worried about those children. It doesn't really bother him because they know that those children are going to heaven. Anyway, he just did them a favor. All the believing Muslims will be going to heaven. He just killed the ones that are infidels. It doesn't matter how many Muslims he killed or get killed in his actions because they're all going to heaven anyway. And we have to understand this because this is what we're dealing with. Allah is the goal, Prophet the model, Quran its constitution, jihad its path, and death for the case of Allah is the sublime belief. This is what you aspire to. So when we say Hamas hides behind children and hides behind civilians, it's not only a really diabolical, I would use the word satanical method of warfare, it's also a goal in and of itself. To get as many innocents to heaven as possible. They want children to die. Because by doing so, they're meeting their goals. They can also use it as a cynical way for Israel to get clobbered because they know that the West doesn't like when children get dead. I'll go back just one more. These changes on the local, the events of October 7th have really created a new reality in Israel on the local level. Things that we believed in the past, paradigms, presuppositions, belief systems that we've held until now have now been changed. These are the two that, there's more, but these are the two that are important ones. One, we're no longer fighting a war about borders. Remember, I talked about the occupied, not occupied, 1967. Israel acquires territory. That territory is now occupied. That occupation is the source of the conflict. Get rid of the occupation, solve the occupation, solve the conflict, right? Great formula. It's wrong. We realize we're not fighting a war about a border. We're fighting a war not where the border will be drawn, but whether a border will be drawn. We're fighting a war not where will Israel be between the river and the sea. Remember the map? The River Jordan, the Mediterranean Sea. But whether at all Israel will exist anywhere between the river and the sea. Those people out there on the streets who are shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, have a clear answer. What will Palestine be free of exactly? Thank you. Of Jews. Israel has no place between the river and the sea. They're not demonstrating for peace. Notice that there's no longer talk on the street about that two-state solution. It's only in the capitals by some politicians. But Israelis realize that we're now no longer fighting the war of 67, we're fighting the war of 1948. We're fighting the war of independence, we're fighting a war for our very existence. Because Israel cannot exist, right? This. Okay? As long as this exists, Israel can no longer tolerate that. Israel cannot tolerate the existence of a jihadi entity on its borders. It's a do or die. Either we get rid of it, or we pack up and find another place to live. Okay? Because if it happened once, it can happen again. The second thing, and they won't stop. They said so in their own words. Right? In an interview to Lebanese TV, the head of Hamas, or the second in charge of Hamas, there will be another October 7th, and another October 7th, and a million October 7th until we get rid of them. Okay? So it's them or us. But it's not only on the local level that these changes have been made. It's also on the regional level. Iran has created this kind of envelope around Israel. We have the Hezbollah, they have an MO. Their MO is to find countries where there's a destabilized government, and most of these countries are failed states, find a Shiite minority, the Iranians are the Shia version of Islam, and give them lots of guns. make them into the most powerful military force in that country, stronger than that national army of that country, and now they're the kingmaker. And that's what they did in Lebanon, and that's what they're doing in Syria, and that's what they're doing in Iraq, and that's what they did in Yemen, and that's what they did with Hamas in Gaza, and created an envelope surrounding Israel as a deterrence against Israel's future possible attack of its own nuclear program. If Israel tries to attack Iranian nuclear program, it'll have rain of rockets coming down on it from all directions. And that was supposed to be some kind of a counterbalance. But two things happened. One, inside Israel, there was a great deal of discord in the last 10 months. If you've looked at the news from Israel on October 6th, you would be hearing about the fabric of society being ripped apart. You'd be hearing about people demonstrating against the government, the judicial reform, and moving away from democracy. And one half of the people think the country is slipping out of democracy, and the other half of the people feeling that their democratic vote has been negated. And this clash was sending out a message to our enemies that Israeli society is about to fray, it's weak, it won't stand up to defend itself. At the same time, new alliances were being made. The Abraham Accords which Donald Trump, President Trump and Jared Kushner created between Israel, the Gulf states, Morocco, Sudan, the Abraham Accords, no longer land for peace. It's now the Abrahamic Accord, the Abrahamic faiths. It's a creation that gives the Jews and the Arabs a role as indigenous to the region. That's why it's Abraham. Abraham's from here. It's different than the land for peace formula, which is why it actually works, because it's peace for peace, not land for peace. Saudi Arabia was just waiting around the corner, and it was just a matter of days. In the first week of October, there were also these events, public displays, Israeli politicians in Saudi Arabia performing, praying in public, and there was a tabernacle, there was a sukkah, there was a festival of Sukkot. It was just a matter of days before the announcement of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would have been announced, and that would have pulled the rug under the Iranian plan. What's the Iranian plan? To get rid of Israel, because Israel is kind of a stumbling block, but Israel is also the springboard. By getting rid of Israel, the Iranians believe they will get the entire Arab and Muslim world behind them. Iran wants to export the Islamic Revolution. It's not me saying it, they're saying it. They've been saying it since 1979, since this whole darn thing began. They want to export the revolution. They say it loud and clear, and they prepare for it, and they play the long game. They've been preparing this for decades. Decades. And they believe that if they can get rid of Israel, the Arab and the Muslim world will get behind them. We're talking about 1.6 billion people, or something like that. Don't quote me on the number. That will be able, with that wind in their sails, head out to the west. That's the goal. Israel is only the appetizer. Who's the main course? Yeah, you are. Israel is a small devil, America is the big devil. They say this, not me. They're saying this. We just have not been listening. Or we tried to explain it away because it isn't convenient. So the regional lines have been drawn. I believe that once the war is over, the Saudis will come back to the table. There is a need and a desire in the moderate Arab world and the Muslim world to move away from the radical Islam. Even in Saudi Arabia, which is not a country that I would define as moderate at all. But there is a desire to move away from that belief system into a more modern economy and more modern society, which will give a better future to their children. In Arab capitals in the Middle East, while they're paying lip service to the Palestinian plight and the suffering, the real suffering of the Palestinian people, they're waiting and hoping and wishing and praying for an Israeli victory over Hamas. If Israel is not able to win over Hamas, they will be the first domino to fall after Israel. And then it's coming for you. It's not just a regional war, because the lines have been drawn. We have moved, those of you like me who grew up in the 70s and 80s, we remember the end of the Cold War. We remember Reagan and the victory over the empire of evil. We remember the Berlin Wall. We remember the Iron Curtain falling. Glasnost, Perestroika, remember all that? And the victory of the West. And Francis Fukuyama writing his big essay, The End of History. No more war. McDonald's in all countries. Countries without McDonald's won't fight each other. That was actually a real thing. Like, it's a real academic school of thought. Liberal democracies won. Jeans and iPhones for all. Yay. Awesome. We lived in a post-war reality where globalization, and we're all one big happy family, and John Lennon, and all those other things. And slowly, even without noticing, we moved into a new pre-war era. And we're looking at the dividing line, which is becoming very, very clear. What Israel is to Iran, Ukraine is to Russia, and Taiwan is to China. And these actors, this axis, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, are lining up. Where are we? So Israel, the moderate Arab countries, NATO, United States, Canada, are on the other side. It is really a question of the side that upholds life, that protects life, that admires life, that loves liberty and freedom and human rights, the side that is prededicated, that is built on the foundation of our shared Judeo-Christian values, the civilization which is based on the values and the teachings found in the Book of Books, the Bible that gives us our core fundamental beliefs and value systems of protecting life. And we're pitted now against those that want to destroy life, tyrants, oppressive regimes, despots that deny the rights to women, that still practice slavery, that allow the rise of jihad. On what side are you? That's a rhetorical question. I know what side you're on. But your kids are going to come back for college with really weird ideas. They're going to be very confused. The adoption of the Palestinian cause by the academic world and the liberal progressive left has really muddied the waters. It's really created or broken the moral compass in many places in the West. Which is why you find yourself, or find situations where young people who are really good, who want to see a better world, and they demonstrate against climate change and cutting down the rainforests and save the animals. That's really, really nice causes, are also aligned now with people who butcher and rape and murder as a form of resistance. And that's really troubling. I want to apologize now, because I debated with myself and with Ryan. We had this discussion long and hard, how much to share of what happened on October 7th. And I decided not to show you the videos and the images. I don't want you to see the videos and the images, because I want you to be able to sleep at night. But it is important to realize what we're looking at. It's rape and torture and murder and butchering of children in front of their parents. And it's burning of families alive on a massive scale. It is then the kidnapping of children and babies and the elderly and innocent women and children into Gaza. They're still there, over 240. I was going to say 239. Baby was born. One of the women taken was in the 9th month. 2 bodies were recovered this week that didn't make it. What makes this so unique is not, well, I used to, as an educator, I always rejected anybody who made any comparisons to the Nazis. Right? To Hitler, there's only Hitler. Nobody's like Hitler. Nobody resembles Hitler. There's one Hitler. Nobody's like the Nazis. Nothing is like a concentration camp but a concentration camp. You can't make those comparisons because you basically diminish the horror and the atrocities of the Holocaust by making any comparisons. So no comparisons. But here I find myself making comparisons. Because Hamas have taken Mein Kampf, they've taken Hitler's writings and copy-pasted them into their charter. They raise children from a small age to grow up, to learn that their path to redemption, their path to paradise is through martyrdom. To hate Jews to the extent that it's a good deed. It's a righteous deed. It's a moral deed to kill them. And little girls to rise up, to grow up, to give birth, and rejoice when their children become martyrs and die for the cause. The Nazis, when they rounded up the Jews in the forest and shot them into pits, knew what they were doing was wrong. The Einsatzgruppen, these groups of troops, these police officers that went in the wake of the advancing German army to round up Jews and kill them, suffered from terrible, terrible nightmares. They had to drink heavily, even use drugs, breakdown in discipline and violence in these units eventually led the Nazis to choose the gas chambers than just shooting people. But inside, in their hearts, they knew they were doing something wrong. These guys, we have the video cams. We have the GoPros they were wearing on their body armor as they were going through house to house, killing people. The joy, the glee, the shouts of jubilation, the laughter. In one case, we have a recording was intercepted of a man who just killed a Jewish woman, took her phone and calls his parents. I can't mimic the joy in his voice. But he calls his parents, "Father, get mother on the phone and open your WhatsApp. Look at the images and the videos that I just put there. I just killed 10 Jews with my own hands. I killed 10 Jews. I killed 10, Dad. I killed 10. Their blood is on my hands. I killed 10. Get mom. I want to tell her too." Then he explained to his mother how to open the WhatsApp. "Mom, I killed 10. Look, I killed 10. Your son's a hero. Bless you, my son," is the answer the parents give. They felt joy. They also dragged those people back into Gaza, and thousands of people gathered around to spit and to shout in joy and to celebrate and to hand out candy to their children. One of the truths that have come out of October 7th is the realization that distinction that we make between Hamas and the population of Palestine is not at all obvious. Because that behavior, these 40,000 Hamas troops, grew up in a culture that allowed it. They went to school that taught it. They went to mosques that preached it. They saw TV programs. They didn't come from Mars. They're not aliens from outer space that suddenly showed up to take over Gaza. They're part and parcel of Palestinian society. Now, please don't get me wrong. That's not to say that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. They are, and they are many, and they are hurting, and they are suffering, and it's tragic and horrible. But Hamas didn't come from outer space. And so that distinction, while not obvious, I am sure is there. I want to believe it's there. The evidence to that distinction is lacking. It's falling short. And the burden of proof is now on them. Just like in Nazi Germany, Nazis were only 9% of the German population. The silent minority is irrelevant. I'm not going to show you the pictures, but if you like, you can take a picture of the screen with your phones. I know you don't need to. And again, I don't want you to. I urge you not to look at these pictures and videos. This is the most well-documented atrocity of modern time. Not the only one. As we speak, there are hundreds of people who are being slaughtered in Darfur. Muslim Arabs are killing Africans. As we speak, there's 1.7 million Afghans who are being kicked out of Pakistan to go back to Taliban territory. You can imagine the atrocities they're going through. Nobody's talking about that. But this is the most well-documented atrocity of modern time. And there are already people who are denying it happened. Believe it or not, they're saying, oh no, that's not right. Israel killed their own people so they could have an excuse. It's a false flag operation. So they can have an excuse to go and attack Gaza. It's all fake. So again, this is not for you. But you can take a picture because you might meet people who will tell you these things. It's fake, it's not real. But there's evidence. And you can show them where that is. Your kids coming from college will have met those people that deny that this happened. The last level of analysis is the civilizational level. We have local, regional, global, but it's also civilizational. The rampant anti-Semitism that has exploded around the world is shocking. It's absolutely shocking. Jews are woke up to a reality that they only heard stories about from their grandparents from the 1920s and 30s. The veneer of civility, the veneer of, oh no, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just anti-Israel. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm only anti-Zionist. I love the Jews, I just don't like the Zionists and the Israelis. From the river to the sea, remember? This lady, she's a Dutch medical student in Poland. There it is. That's the face of modern anti-Semitism. She believes she's a good person. She was interviewed right after this. She asked her, what do you mean with this sign? She said, do you want to throw all the Jews in a dustbin? Oh, no, not Jews. We love Jews. It's just the Zionists. Israel needs to disappear. Well, what do you think that is? And so this it's not new, but what's new is it's how clear and stark and loud and acceptable it's become to hate, to call to the death of Jews in the public square, to rip down the pictures of kidnapped children because somehow you feel that's the right thing to do because that might allow somebody to feel sympathetic towards Israel. Israel's the bad guy, remember? So they rip down the pictures and the images of the kidnapped children and think that they're doing a good thing to the world. And so my ask to you is to reach out to your Jewish neighbors and your Jewish colleagues and your Jewish friends, even if you haven't spoke to them since college, or if there's the one that you write to them a holiday greeting and a Christmas card or a birthday wish once a year, reach out to them. They're hurting. They're in shock. They need to know that you're thinking of them. Ask them what you can do. They probably won't say anything, but they'll need to know that you have their back. Edmund Burke said, when bad men combine, the good must associate. Else we will fall, one by one. A pitiful sacrifice and a contemptible struggle. Well, the bad men had combined. Now it's time for the good to associate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uri. If you all can stay, do you have time for questions?
Yes, I do.
We'll have a question and answer period. Before that, let me just say this. Proverbs 8:13 says the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. There's the only choice that we have. Are we going to love evil? Are we going to fear the Lord and hate evil? And so we stand with Israel and make no apologies about it, and our hearts are with you, your people. We'll have a mic, and if you want to ask any question, Amber is going to help us. Amber's our children's director. She's going to help us. Amber, if you want to take that side, and I'll take this side. Just raise your hand. We'll bring a mic to you.
Biden has just gone to Israel as a friend. I think he was setting them up because he's been financing their enemies. Do you think he might break the Abraham Accords at the 3.5-year mark?
I don't think he's going to break the Abraham Accords because they're not his to break. The Abraham Accords between Israel and they were brokered by America. They were brokered by Jared Kushner and Donald Trump. But the accords are between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and those countries went on record saying the Abraham Accords stand. The UAE and Bahrain specifically. And so I'm not worried that those will fall through. President Biden and Israelis have a very, very clear, a clear view. On the one hand, a very high level of admiration and respect for the clear position that the United States of America has taken in the early days of this war, the steadfast support for Israel, the sending and the arrival of real American power to the Middle East, 2 aircraft carriers, a nuclear submarine, attacks on Iranian bases in Iraq and Syria, shooting down rockets and drones from Yemen. That's real on-the-ground support. The aid package, the refilling of ammunition. So there's been a lot of real action on the ground. And the speeches that he made, the visits that he's made Israelis feel very, very warm and welcome. And very safe. I believe the American presence in the Middle East today is what's preventing this war from escalating. Now, for now. I can't explain, but I don't understand why this is still not sunk in the White House. His suggestion to release $10 or $11 billion to Iran is, in my opinion, a mistake. I don't know what the reasoning behind it is. I've not been able to put my finger on it. I think, and I'm afraid, that the State Department, many capitals in the West, are still locked into the paradigms of October 6th. They're still in that place where they are talking about the Palestinian Authority coming in to take over Gaza, or the two-state solution, or the paradigms of financial relief as a vehicle towards moderation and containment of Iran, as though, again, they're not listening to them. They're not listening to what they say in their own language. They're not reading their publications because we have not yet understood the language of jihad. So my call to you, besides calling your Jewish friends after that, call your elected officials. Call your senators, call your congressmen and women, your local, your regional your national, your federal. Tell them what you think. Tell them that you have their back, that you support them in standing with Israel. You support them in going after Iran. I don't mean to start war with Iran. I mean to at least not let Iran continue with this action. And definitely not release funds that will enable them to do so.
I have a question for you, back here. What is a more respectful term to use instead of Palestine? Would it be Canaan? Instead of using the term Palestine, which was used, to my understanding, is a disrespectful term for Israel?
Well, it depends in what context you use the word Palestine.
Because doesn't it come from the Philistines?
Yes. The name Palestine, those of you who have traveled to Israel with me will know this very well. The name Palestine comes from the rejection and the attempt to destroy the connection the Jews had to Judea. Right? After Emperor Adrian gets really pissed off at the Jews for rejecting Roman culture and lamenting and hoping to rebuild the temple, and so he says, I'll show them. And he razes Jerusalem to the ground, and he builds a new city called Aelia Capitolina, and he erases the name Judea and calls it Palestina. He tries to humiliate the Jews by naming the land after an ancient biblical foe. Okay, the Palestinians of today have nothing to do with the Philistines of the Bible. They're Arab. The Philistines were Greek. Okay, they were European. So they had nothing to do with one another, but the name stuck, right? So depending how you use Palestine, Palestine is neutral as in itself, but people use the word, people describe the Palestinian Authority, for example. They say Palestine against Israel. There's no such thing, there's no country called Palestine. There's a Palestinian Authority. There are also an entire people that define themselves as Palestinian. And we can't tell them, well, that's not who you are. I mean, we can, but that's how they define themselves anyway. So using the word Palestine as such is not offensive. It depends on what context you use it. A lot of people use it the way that is offensive is when they say that Israel took over Palestine. There's no country before 1948 called Palestine. There's no government. There's no coin. There's no flag. It was the general name for the region. Israel was created in what the British called back then the British mandate of Palestine, but there's no country that was conquered, occupied, or taken over in 1948. As long as we understand that, you can use Palestine anytime you want.
Yes. When this war started, Iran and Hezbollah were threatening Israel immensely, whatever you would do in Gaza. Yet, when the IDF went in, it seemed like they went in very successfully, and they're really doing the job well and quick. Do you hear that rhetoric slowing down? Are the threats still strong between has that rocket fire from Hezbollah started to slow down? Is Iran starting not to be as rhetoric and meaningful?
The big fear, fear is not the wrong word, the big concern in the early days of the war is that Iran will pull the trigger in Lebanon. Okay? If Iran pulls the trigger in Lebanon, that means that Hezbollah mobilizes its entire rocket arsenal on Israel. That takes the attention away from the Gaza Strip, divides Israel's attention and military personnel and defensive systems, and have to go on the offensive on both sides, and it will be very, very difficult. That was the concern. It did not materialize. And I think it didn't materialize for two reasons. Like I said earlier, the Americans showed up. After years that the Americans have been slowly withdrawing, that's true since Obama and then Trump and Biden, all three, I mean, there are very, very big differences between the administrations, all right? You know that, I know that. But as far as their policy of withdrawal of American power from the Middle East, they follow the same path. And so America has been withdrawing from the Middle East, and now they showed up in force. And that was a miscalculation on the Iranian side. They didn't count on that. And that's what's keeping them at bay. The second thing is, if they launch all those rockets at Israel now, they basically playing the ace they have up their sleeve. That's the ace they have up their sleeve to protect themselves from an Israeli attack on their nuclear program. Right? So they're not going to do that because then Israel will have nothing to lose at this point, and then they won't be able to protect their own nuclear program. So for those two reasons, I think they're being kept at bay. That doesn't mean it'll stay that way. Right? If Hamas cries uncle, and Iran are going to lose their southern asset, which is a very big asset against Israel, they then might pull the trigger. They might. I don't know that they will, but they might. But that's something that we have to keep our finger on the pulse and see what happens. At any rate, I do think that eventually Iran poses a challenge to the extent that eventually it'll have to be met. If not by Israel, then by a coalition of countries that will have to cause a regime change to make the world a safer place.
First of all, thank you again for being here. Wonderful lessons we learned here. Two quick questions. One, is it your opinion that over the 80s and 90s, where PLO was really in control, supposedly, did they keep Hamas in check, or was Hamas growing from within inside the PLO? So that's my first question. My second question is, for the greater audience, I think it's really important to define the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas. And they may have the ultimate goal in the end, like you described, but I think it would be important for you to describe the difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. So Hamas was established as a counterweight to the PLO. Okay, and in the early days, it was a religious organization setting up social services, and they were considered honest, in opposed to the PLO and the PA's corruption. So they're very, very distinct. They're also distinct from an ideological and a religious perspective. While Fatah, or PLO, they're Muslim, but they're essentially a secular organization. They were established in 1964. They were established as the Palestine Liberation Organization. Now, just to remind you, 1964 is before Israel captured the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Right? It's before the occupation. So what Palestine are they supposed to liberate in 1964? Well, that's Israel, pre-67, right? So they're established in 1964, and they're established as a essentially secular, nationalistic, Marxist organization, and they start carrying out terror attacks already back then. It's only in the 80s, as the PLO gains popularity and strength in the Palestinian population, that Hamas is established now as an extension of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is a religious Islamic organization with global aspirations. Okay, with global aspirations. It's not limited to Palestine or Israel. It's with global aspirations, and they are set up, and Israel tacitly agrees to the creation of Hamas as a political organization in the Palestinian territories, because it balances out Yasser Arafat and the PLO. Yasser Arafat is a terrorist. He's a bad guy. Right? This is the religious, mosques and social services. So there's that balance which is now being created. Fast forward to 2005, 6, and 7, that Hamas takes over the Gaza Strip. One of the failures, or one of the conceptual failures that led us to the intelligence and operational failure of October 7th. And it's not just a simple failure, it's a colossal failure. It's an epic failure. It's a biblical proportions failure. Is the conception that the Israeli decision makers were locked in. that Hamas is tameable, that Hamas can be contained, that Hamas has the rhetoric of jihad, but they're not really like the Iranians. They're not Shiite, they're Sunni. And they would rather sit in Gaza and get fat and receive cash in suitcases from Qatar and send their children to drive fancy cars in Bahrain or wherever and take money and protection money and from all those tunnels and smuggling of goods into Gaza, rather than risk another altercation with Israel. And that was the belief in Israel. And as long as Hamas was in charge of Gaza and was contained, it counterbalanced the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And now Israel could say, wait a minute, we have two Palestinians. We have two Palestinian authorities. We have a Hamas state and we have a West Bank state. So we don't have a two-state solution, we have a three-state solution. And until these two can't get it together, there's nothing to talk about. So it was, at least this is how it was presented, that it was in Israel's interest to maintain Hamas tame in order to maintain the divide and conquer type situation. We were wrong. We were absolutely wrong. And the person who led this concept is Benjamin Netanyahu. And you'll have to be counted for the day after the war.
We have a couple questions up here, one right here.
The second part of the question about Hezbollah and Hamas, just in short, Hamas is a Islamic Brotherhood Sunni organization, which has with global aspirations. It originated in Egypt and then went out to the rest of the Arab world. Erdogan in Turkey is Islamic Brotherhood as well. Hezbollah is a Shiite organization and a proxy of Iran. Okay, and it takes its marching orders from Iran. Those are the two differences. There's a difference between these organizations. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. With American, first let me say on October 6th, I considered myself an American Jew. I don't anymore. I'm actually looking at going to Israel. With the fact that America is being attacked all over, do we not look weak by the response that we've had? I mean, yes, we have aircraft carriers and, it's a show of support, but do we not look weak to our enemies there?
So I think that is the perception of America in the Middle East is not from 4 weeks ago. Okay, it's been several years now, and I can even mark the event that began the decline of American power or American perception of power in the Middle East. It was in the time of President Obama when Assad used chemical weapons on his own people and crossed a red line that President Obama had drawn, and he did nothing. He actually retracted his position and allowed the Russians to come in. Okay? That begins. Now, it's not only that. Okay? There have been other events since then. But like I said, America in general, 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, many presidents, and the internal discord in the United States, and the ongoing and continuous withdrawal of American power from the Middle East, the lack of resolve, and I would say even the justification of sending your boys and girls to fight wars in faraway lands, and you don't always understand exactly why. All these things together have caused in the last 2 decades for America to withdraw its power from the Middle East, and the Middle East paid attention. When what's called the Arab Spring, again, misnomer, it's like a Muslim winter, but never mind, in Egypt took place, right? Mubarak, a 40-year-long ally of the United States, President Obama drop-kicked him in a nanosecond. Within 48 hours, he punted him away. The Arab world took notice. Said, that's your ally? You're counting on that? They'll turn on you really, really quickly if it's not in their interest. And so everybody started to shop around for others. So I would say the answer is yes, but it's fixable. Yes. Oh, sorry.
First off, thank you for being here. My prayers are with you. I mean no disrespect. Welcome to the daylight. I've never understood how anybody could begin to consider to allege a peace with people that said there can be no peace if you exist. I don't understand, God bless them for wanting peace, but there is, those are diametrically opposed. Please relay to your people, don't count on Mr. Biden. Just because we're there doesn't mean that he won't restrict them in a heartbeat. Or for who we know not how, if there is thought there.
Sir, is there a question?
Well, no, I guess not. He's around don't limit this to Israel and the United States. They are around the world, around the planet, and they are here now. I'm waiting for the ball to drop to have the attacks launched inside the United States so that to deflect the presence of America in the Mediterranean.
Thank you.
But
Thank
you
you.
do have my prayers.
Thank you very much.
Question is, we read in the Bible, the descendants of Jacob have been up against the ropes many times, prayers gone up. Think of Hezekiah, Sennacherib, era, and so on. Prayer has gone up. What do you see, if anything, that God is doing or God has done in the current situation?
I don't know that I can answer that question. I think that there are so many miracles that happened on October 7th. So many small coincidences that we know don't exist, right? So many heroic acts of people acting in ways that are beyond human. People whose lives were saved in miraculous ways by what appears to be pure chance. That for a believer, it's impossible not to see God's hand being played out. At the same time, almost 1,400 people were murdered. And we have to believe, as people of faith, that there is a greater plan afoot. And so I think that for people of faith, these events strengthened their resolve. I think you'll find also, I don't know if you follow the images of Israel, not in your mainstream media, but on Telegram and different Israeli channels, a lot of the spirit, what we call the ruach, the spirit of the IDF and Israeli soldiers, an entire generation, is just uncanny. They go in there in song. They're going in there in prayer. It's Friday night now in Israel. They're singing hymns and praises and psalms and Friday night prayers right now in Gaza. And so I think that there is that those things go hand in hand.
I just want to say thank you also to Davarba. I echo the sentiments of this being so wonderful to hear, that we need to hear and we need to pass this on. Just as a aside, I was just there in Israel in March and April of this year. I know where you're talking. I was at the IDF base close to Gaza, looking out. And so thinking now of just the horrific event that has occurred, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just narrow it down to this one, because the way that I see it, above all else, this is a spiritual battle. It's been going on for a long time about whose land this is, and we know as people of God whose land it is. But my question is now, as we look at this and all of the things that have changed within Israel, and I was there when there was the protest, in March and April and everything, and the country it seemed like it was so divided. But my question is, as all of the people that are there, as you think about what you have to do, the realization that it's no longer sustainable, that the borders, and when you go there and you see how difficult it is, because where the borders have been made, whether it's up in the Golan or down in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, how you can defend all of this. So the question is, what in your opinion do you think is going to happen with Gaza at the end?
So the day after is a question that a lot of people have been addressing. Israel has already announced that it will continue to maintain the security envelope around Gaza. That includes presence on the ground as an interim solution until a new mechanism can be developed. What is sure is that, number one, Hamas is not going to come back. We will take out its entire infrastructure and capabilities and population and people to actually have a chance to harm us again. So that goes without saying. The hostages will be returned. Until the hostages are not returned, Israel is not going to leave Gaza. Period. Okay? Now the question is what happens the day after. There are several things. First of all, Israel turns to the north. Because you're right. You're right. Israel cannot accept the existence of a jihadi organization at its borders, armed to the teeth, hell-bent on destroying Israel and killing Jews. Unacceptable. Israelis will feel that they've won only when they feel safe to raise their children again near Gaza and on the northern border. All right? So that's number one. Whatever solution will occur in Gaza, it will have to include a denazification, just like after the war in Germany, a de-Hamasization, a de-jihadization, which means they have to go in, build new schools, create new curriculums, offer new books, and maintain presence on the ground, just like the Allied forces occupied Germany after the war. I'm not sure it has to be Israel. Maybe it's a third party. Maybe it's the Saudis. Maybe it's the Egyptians. Maybe it's the Jordanians. I don't know. The best minds will have to sit together after the war and figure it out. But just like in 1941 and 1942, nobody was asking, oh gosh, what will we do in Germany after we kill Hitler? Nobody was asking in 42 in Normandy, let's have a 3-day humanitarian pause so the Germans can regroup and have a ceasefire and figure out how to go further. Let's win the war. Let's get rid of Hamas. And then we'll sit and figure out what's the best way to move forward. And using the new paradigms, not the old paradigms.
Let's take one last question here. Would you mind addressing the apparent discord within the state of Israel regarding the attitude about Netanyahu and some of the people that seem to not be supporting the Israeli defense of itself?
So there has been tremendous discord inside Israel before the war about the judicial reform. I don't want to get into it to a great length, but essentially the idea was the Netanyahu and his coalition wished to remove the ability of the judiciary to carry oversight over legislature. Israel doesn't have a separation of church and state the way you do. A separation of, Separated power. We also don't have a separation of church and state. That too. But we don't have the branches of power the way you do. We have the legislature and the government, right? The executive and the legislature is basically one body, and then we have the judiciary. And the only balance of power is the ability of the judiciary to have oversight over legislation. The thing is that in the last 40 years, they have slowly encroached and moved further into that oversight, to the extent that they really manage the affairs of state. If there's something they don't like based on their own reasonability, not law, but what the judges think is reasonable, then they can overturn legislation. So we have an unelected body of professional judges who usually cut from a very similar cloth, politically and socioeconomically, who are determining for the elected body their policymaking and lawmaking. And that has become for most of the parties that are on the right of in the Israeli parliament, or center-right, too much to bear, and so they wanted to change the way the judiciary, the judges are elected, and take away their authority and their ability to overrule laws and create basic laws. We don't have a constitution either, right? So the people who on the other side of the political map saw that as an attempt to erase any kind of separation of powers, which would cause Israel to slide on a slippery slope away from being a democracy, because you'll have only single body, the government, which is cut from the parliament, from the legislature, that determines policy, and there's nobody that can, they can pass any law they want. Without a constitution and without judicial oversight, they can pass any law they want. They can pass laws against minorities. They can pass laws in favor of minorities. They can pass any law, and there will be no oversight. And that slides Israel a little bit away, and a slippery slope, away from being a liberal democracy. And so people were demonstrating against that. That's why they're using that slogan of pro-democratic voices. On the other hand, they were very powerful, very, very strong. They encompassed a lot of the economy and the industry and the technology and even the military. And the people who voted for the government felt that their democratic voice is being stolen. Like they elect the government, they win in the polls, they create a government, but then they can't carry out their policy. And so you have half the country who is crying that Israel's losing its democratic nature, and the other half of the country who are saying, you're taking away our democratic voice. Right? And so that clash, and Netanyahu was, instead of trying to sit down and reach an agreement, because 80% of the Israelis agree on 80% of the things, like even people in the center and the center-left agree that there has to be some kind of a reform, they could have sat down and worked it out. Instead, he tried to bulldozer through on the head of those who opposed him, because he was locked in a coalition government with very extreme elements in the Israeli political system. And that's what brought us to October 6th. After October 7th, there's a realization in Israel that we can't afford that level of discord. We can't afford that level of polarization. Look what happened. We took our eye off the ball. We took our eye off the ball. There's no two ways about it. We screwed up. We were focused inward while we were supposed to looking outward. And our enemies took advantage of it and caught us with our pants down. Just terrible. And the person who is blamed most for bringing us to this point, and under his watch, not just now, he's been in charge for the better part of the last 15 years, is Benjamin Netanyahu. And so not only people who opposed him before, oppose him even more now, but even among his own supporters, there are a lot of people who are saying, he who broke it can't fix it. And so whatever happens the day after, we will have another election. I don't know when, 3 months, 6 months, whenever that election is, I think you will see a complete reshaping of the Israeli political map. I don't see how Netanyahu can continue. He won't be able to lead the Likud into another victory. He'll have to resign or he will be fired. At any rate, Israelis will ask all the tough questions, and the people who are responsible from Netanyahu downward in the military, in the intelligence, will have to put down their keys and answer for what happened.
Thank you very much for being here. I just wondered if you thought the West Bank Palestinians would rise up, and if so, you think that would draw Jordan into this conflict?
If they were what?
If that would draw Jordan into the conflict?
So the first part of the answer is Hamas is trying to get the West Bank into the fight, so far without success. Israel, for the last year, has been very, very successful in rooting out Hamas terror infrastructure, Islamic Jihad, in the West Bank. You might have heard that, last year, the West Bank was the bloodiest year, and a lot of people have been killed. All of them are terrorists. So Israel has been acting in the West Bank for the better part of the year, and Hamas has not been able to foment a popular uprising in the West Bank. Just 2 days ago, yesterday actually, there was an attack by Hamas terror unit at a terminal near where I live, actually, a place where I drive all the time. They had a ton of ammunition. They got stopped. They were killed right away. But they managed to kill an Israeli soldier and wound several others, civilians. They were killed right away on the spot, but had they not been, they had tremendous amount of weapons and ammunition. They were going to go on a rampage. That would have lit up the West Bank. All right, so they're trying, so far without success. The second part of your question is a hard no. Jordan does not have any appetite, ability, willingness to join the fight. They have their own problems, a ton of problems inside Jordan, weak government, unpopular royal house, 75% Palestinian, 1 million refugees from Iraq and Syria. It's a country of 5 million. Right? And there's a 20%, additional 20% refugees. No resources. They get their gas from Israel, their water from Israel, the access to port from Israel. So, no, they won't be able to do anything. They might be part of the solution for the day after, as a confederation in the West Bank, but they won't join the fight.
Thank you.
Everybody, I need to move on.
All right, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all for being here.
One more thing, if I may, one more thing. As you know, I work as a tour guide, and nobody's coming to Israel anytime soon. But you can visit Israel in a virtual video tour that I've designed and I've produced. And I'm going to leave a bunch of postcards in the back over there or on the table with a QR code. If you wish to have a virtual tour of Israel through video, it helps support me at this time. But you're welcome to use one of those postcards and the QR codes and take a look. And the next time you come to Israel, I'll be happy to help you arrange the trip.
So much. Thank you for being here again. Go home, hug your family members. Evil is amongst us, but if there's evil, there's also good. His name is God, His Son Jesus Christ. We have an opportunity to be a conduit of light everywhere we go and let light shine in this darkness. Thank you for being here.